We are live.
Okay, we're Senate Education Committee back after actually incredible extended break. And we have the last order of business for the day is to have the Agency of Education on both H 930 and 931, the miscellaneous bill and the absenteeism bill. And I don't know which one of you wants to go first or how are you going to do this, but okay, it's Emily. And you are, go ahead.
Thank you so much for inviting me in for the end of the day today. Emily Simmons, General Counsel, Agency of Education. I was going to speak to you for just a few moments about provisions in H 930, the chronic absenteeism bill, specifically the new language on post-enrollment hearings of home study enrollments. So can I direct you to written testimony that the agency submitted under yesterday's date, April 29th? Follow up on home study testimony. That's what I'm speaking from today. So as you heard from Deputy Secretary Briggs Campbell on Tuesday of this week, several recent developments in the home study landscape and the agency's oversight of those programs have important implications for the language that you are considering in the chronic absenteeism bill related to hearings. You all are aware, because I reviewed your discussion, that interest and enrollment in home study in Vermont dramatically increased during the COVID-19 pandemic, and we have yet to see return to pre-pandemic enrollment numbers as of this time. It is unclear whether we will. The home study statute in Title 16 was changed in 2023 on the Agency of Education's recommendation, so that the state was switched to what's known as an enrollment notice homeschool framework. This is a similar approach to what's taken in the majority of states, and we modeled our statute really closely on New Hampshire's homeschooling statute for those 2023 changes. Now, going back a little further prior to those changes, so prior to 2023, the agency utilized 2 full-time positions, 1 partial FTE, and an additional limited service position that helped us out seasonally during home study enrollment season, all to manage home study paperwork review. With the increase during COVID-19 of the number of home study enrollments, that workload became unmanageable under the current statute at the time. And on the agency's review in 2023, it was our recommendation that that really significant use of staff time was not resulting in measurable quality improvement or oversight of the learning happening in those home study programs. So pre-pandemic and during the pandemic, because the statute really didn't set AOE up with strong authority to disallow a home study enrollment except in the most extreme cases, what we were doing was being required to review each enrollment for completeness, so as to a certain level of detail review in each case, but without the teeth to require improvement where we might see, a lack of rigor, for example. But the program was meeting minimum quality standards. We were bound by the statute to allow that enrollment to take place. Though, as education professionals, our staff were continually seeing what they might identify as, gaps in student learning that were permissible and approvable. So we're in a position pre-2023 as the agency to say this was not the best use of our very limited staff time, and made those recommendations for the change to the statute. If the change had not been made in 2023, the agency would have needed to hire several additional staff just to keep up with that paperwork that I've been describing, regardless of any educational value that would have been gained from that additional investment in resources at the agency. So all this, clear that a change needed to be made. It brought us in line with the common practices other states and enabled that staffing of the agency to be redirected to other priorities like oversight and support for learning in approved independent schools. So this is all just recapping kind of what you've already heard from Jill earlier this week. Because home study trends have persisted beyond the pandemic and continue to be at higher levels than Vermont traditionally has experienced, we requested in the as introduced version of the chronic absenteeism bill time to examine the larger landscape of home study to understand why families are choosing this option at a greater rate today, how the education system might retain these students in our schools, and what level of oversight would best fit our unique Vermont context here, 6 years post-pandemic. That's the approach that was reflected in the House passed version. That's the approach the agency supports. We would note importantly that the study as framed in the House passed version would be occurring alongside implementation of these new uniform definitions elsewhere in the bill for chronic absenteeism and truancy, and in coordination with the work we'll be doing on that implementation with DCF and the state's attorneys. Moving forward with the hearing as contemplated in the current draft will require the AOE to do several things to implement, so I thought I'd just give you a little more color on what that will be for hearings. It will first require us to maintain a list of impartial hearing officers who will be approved by the State Board of Education. These hearing officers' role will be to conduct the administrative hearing at which the agency would be the party sort of prosecuting the case against the home study enrollment, and the other party would be the parent with their legal counsel if they choose to be represented. The hearings would require a staff attorney to, present the case on behalf of the agency, as well as the agency to pay for the time of that hearing officer. Due to the high volume we've been experiencing in other administrative hearings, particularly special education administrative complaints, there's no capacity on the AOE legal team to take on a new set of hearings, the role of that prosecuting attorney for these hearings, as well as oversight of those new contracted service providers, taking away my time as general counsel and being an additional resource demand when we're really kind of straight out as a legal team. So just in summary, we've got a situation where our prior practice did not produce the quality outcomes that we would like to see for students, right? Our oversight was not designed to bring about that result. An increased workload and administrative burden for the agency, and a real lack of any benefits that we see for student learning. So we're worried about this becoming an unfunded mandate on the agency without meaningfully addressing those outcomes or quality of programming. Successful implementation of home study requires really a clear understanding of staffing, expertise, and support needed from the agency, and to be carried out in a way that achieves the intended outcomes for students. Until we have that full picture, the agency is not recommending any statutory changes.
Thanks, Emily. I'm curious, you had mentioned that the hearing process wasn't yielding the results, right? And you were referring to the hearings after enrollment.
That's right.
So I'm happy to be corrected if I'm wrong, but I thought yesterday we were told that over the course of 10 years, there was only one hearing.
Yeah, that's what we mean by that. Yeah. So the circumstances under which the secretary could challenge an enrollment once a student was enrolled was a really, really high bar, to just put it casually. And the evidence to meet that bar was very rarely in the agency's control to bring. Just because, think about it, you're talking about things that do or do not happen inside someone's private home. The agency doesn't employ social workers like DCF does. We don't have the set up authority, training, protections to go in and review what's happening in folks' private homes. So the home study framework is really a system of plans on paper that are submitted by parents, and the agency taking them at their word that that's what happens. We really find ourselves in a hearing posture on the old statute of how can we prove to a hearing officer that the student is not receiving the planned program that the parent told the agency at the outset would be happening.
And your concern about the unfunded mandate, always very valid, coming from anybody, but so what funds would the Agency of Education need to carry this out?
So I can talk to you about the sort of standing contracts we have for other maybe similar work. So a contract for a due process hearing officer, which is I don't need to get in the details, but a special education dispute resolution process has a maximum cost of $60,000 across 2 years. So break that down to $30,000 a year max on that contract. When we actually have that kind of hearing, which follows the rules of evidence, in the vast majority of cases, the parent is represented by counsel. So, kind of a standard hearing. I'm reviewing those invoices and they come in at $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a piece for each instance of a hearing in a case.
So if we had to tack on, so was it $120,000? Is that
The contract is for 2 years. The one I'm thinking of and is $60,000.
oh okay.
Yes.
So, Emily, have you all lately just, do you have like a ballpark, or is it something you're working on for the future to be able to say how much would it cost to have in-house staff who could take a look at every home study plan, call the parent once a year, like if there's any question or concern that you notify DCF so that they can step in. I mean, like this is 5,000 kids that I feel like we're just saying we're not keeping track of.
Well, I really want to make clear, if the agency receives any concerns about student safety or neglect, we do notify DCF with those concerns. So just to get that right off the bat. But then the kind of questions that you're asking are what we're thinking with the report that we're proposing.
Can I ask Emily before you go on? So let's say you do get a concern and you report the concern to DCF. Do you also then think maybe that child is not getting a good education and we should check in from a curricular and academic perspective?
Yes, and we have, folks at the agency that can assist a parent who is interested in receiving our help, right? When we're talking about the hearing context, we're talking about the agency bringing its authority against a parent's wishes. So now, yes, voluntarily and to help with improvement, yes, we can and are situated to help on those one-off cases where we receive concerns, but without the compelling authority. We want to have that appropriate authority in the interest of children's, right to receive an education, and that's the thinking behind the report. That rather than diving in with this solution, to really be thoughtful about the entire statute. And as I described, the larger context of why in Vermont are we seeing the continued increase enrollments in home study? How can the system be responsive to those needs and maybe bring those students back into the education system and out of home study would be our interest. But then for those students that remain in home study and that's still what their parents believe is best for them, to have a more comprehensive system of appropriate state level oversight. I mean, let's remember that parents have a constitutional right to direct the upbringing of their children. They have the constitutional right to something like home study. The state can't needlessly interfere in the execution of that right? That's the Supreme Court Yoder case. But within that framework, we just want to be more planful. And it very well may be that in this report, we bring back a solution that looks like the language that you have in front of you, but that we've carefully considered with our partners in the field, with our partners at DCF and the state's attorneys to make sure that it's tailored to the right level of oversight.
Senator Weeks.
Thanks, sir. So, Emily, thank you for the testimony. In regards to age 930, just for clarity, can you validate whether it sounds like you're pushing back on Section 7 heavily, but Section 8, are you okay with Section 8, which is the study, the report? Sorry, you're
Yes.
supporting that you can do
Supportive of
that.
that. Absolutely.
Okay, and then second question. I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here because I did listen to your first part of your testimony. You really were talking about some manpower issues, how you can effectively support homeschooling and such. And the manpower that you used to have for homeschooling, and again, I recognize that it may have been insufficient for the requirements that we were giving you or the shift of, more and more families homeschooling. The manpower that you had prior to the changes we made about 2 years ago or so, were they reassigned within AOE or were they defunded?
Those folks still work at the agency. They've been shuffled around as part of our larger reorganization effort. And there are still folks who are tasked to processing home study paperwork under this statute. Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of where I'm driving at. So in Section 7, in Section 8, with the folks that you have on hand, you can handle that assignment, produce a report, which is excellent. But Section 7, you don't have, and you may never have had the sufficient manpower to conduct those obligations. Is that?
In Section 7, you're really talking about something that falls not on the program team, as we would talk about it, the home study team, but really on the legal team. When we conduct administrative hearings, that's all in my shop or with the utilization of outside legal resources as required.
Okay, and then would it be safe to say that the results of Section 8, which is the report, you would outline all the requirements that you would need, support requirements, resources requirements that you would need to conduct whatever it is that you
Hearing after enrollment.
to conduct hearings after enrollment and such. And administration.
Yes, as well as any changes that might be made to the enrollment process itself that we would identify. That's been in use for going on 3 years now, so it's a good time to take a look back at how implementation is going.
Thank you.
Emily, so I just read a summary of Yoder. Can you point me to a Supreme Court decision or a legal decision after 1972 that makes it more about a parent's secular preferences? Because this seems to be centering entirely on having deeply held religious beliefs that are not valued in a public school setting.
That's still the through line of why all 50 states offer some type of homeschool programming. It's that for that purpose alone, the state needs to offer a path as an alternate to mandatory public school attendance. And so rather than in Vermont make it available only to folks who are exercising a First Amendment religious belief, we make it available to everyone, which I would prefer to keep because I would not like to get in the business of evaluating folks' philosophical and religious beliefs for using the home study program.
So why do you think there are so many kids who are in homeschool and are not at our institutions?
I think there are different types of families who find home study to be the best solution for their student. And maybe we don't have all of the motivations identified yet. The ones I'm familiar with just from seeing some of the cases, really existed before COVID. So my question when we embark on this study is it an awareness issue to some extent? Was home study talked about in the media, in communities? Is it seem like a lower barrier to entry now culturally almost than it did before COVID? But you would not be the you would not come to me for the answer to that question as the general counsel, but that's just me as one observer wondering. So I think my colleague has a hard stop, and I'd hate if you didn't get to hear from Courtney just as a flag, but I'm still available as well.
Yeah, if you stay on, that would be great. Okay, so Courtney.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you, everyone. Nice to see you again. For the record, I am Courtney O'Brien. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Agency of Education's Director for Safe and Healthy Schools. Thank you for the opportunity to come back in and chat with you all about specifically the proposed amendments in Bill H931 for adjustments to the existing HHB Prevention Advisory Council that is established under Title 16, Section 570 and forward. We have attempted to reach some consensus with our partners in this space over the last 24 hours. We met with a representative, we talked with a representative from the Vermont Network yesterday. We've had conversations with several of our partners at the VPA, VSBA, VSA, and we've communicated with Vermont NEA, but I haven't heard back from folks today. I will note that both the agency and the associations that we discussed with in the last few days continue to have very strong reservations around making any changes to council membership or duties at this time. Concern number one being that we are trying to think very intentionally around effective HHB prevention strategy for Vermont, and this would be a key component of that, and that we would recommend potentially looking at statutory updates to Section 570 as part of a comprehensive review in a future year. Our initial recommendation was potentially to have the agency engage in a comprehensive report with those recommendations ready by December of 2026. We have had some luck, so I will say we've had some great interaction with the partners involved attempting to reach consensus language, but we were not able to reach something that fully met the needs of all. So at this time, acknowledging that there's still some desire from at least some partners to move forward with this change, we are suggesting an alternative language and an alternative section here to preserve the balance of educational practitioners and other interested organizations with the requests of our partner advocacy organizations. We have submitted written testimony today with the specific language that we are suggesting. I would like to just offer a quick overview of some of the work that we've engaged in with the Prevention Council in the past 6 to 12 months. Just for folks' awareness, the council has been reestablished for just over 1 year. There was a bit of a hiatus for a period of time, and Secretary Saunders reestablished the first meeting last year in February. And at that time, the council has delivered important information about the existing model policy and has provided feedback and input on state level agency supports for HHB prevention. The concerns and the criticisms that were shared during that model policy review were heard, were validated, and as a result, the AOE has embarked in a significant shift in attention and resources and staff time being dedicated to HHB prevention. For example, we've secured state funding for a statewide PD series to ensure all educators have the needed competencies for HHB. We've initiated changes to our data processes to make sure that we're using data to make meaningful decisions around HHB. And we are currently reviewing the appropriate criteria for curriculum standards and what we're calling reconnection or restorative practices. I do like to say restorative practices, lowercase. We are talking about kind of more generally those practices which support restoration after an issue. All of those are initiatives which were either brought to our attention through the council feedback or have been shared with the council and have had input requested. We do appreciate that there is ongoing frustration with the existing requirements for investigation, but many of those points of frustration are grounded in statute currently, and again, would be something we would want to consider as part of a comprehensive review. Bottom line, the work that we are attempting to resolve and kind of make progress in here around HHB is very complex. And in order for it to be meaningful and sustainable, we do need to consider the complexities of our school systems, other education law, student rights, such as those under IDEA. And I would 100% agree that the lived experiences of students and families, and particularly those from our marginalized communities, do need to be centered in the approaches we take. However, the language that is proposed currently does create an advisory board that is made up of a large majority of non-practitioners, so non-education-based physicians and practitioners, and which creates an even wider gap in our understanding of how to ensure the work is both practical and sustainable. Very specifically, the language that we're suggesting is that we would suggest if membership must be expanded, we would suggest including a representative of educators in those places, such as Title IX coordinators, special educators, or otherwise designated HHB personnel or administrators. So these would be practitioners or education-based employees who have an active role and have been trained in the processes that we are discussing. In terms of scope, we did reach some consensus with Vermont Network yesterday around some of the language tweaks that we would like to see. Most notably, some of the language was adjusted to utilize words such as review and coordinate, and we would suggest that these items, specifically under Section 2 duties, item B is adjusted to review and advise on school and statewide activities relating to the prevention of and response to harassment, hazing, and bullying. And then in item D, review and advise on resources on harassment, hazing, harassment, and bullying, rather than to develop and distribute directly. We are suggesting that in item C, we agree that having some clarity here on how often the model policy is reviewed is important and is a great addition. We would suggest that this review occurs once every 3 years. This is consistent with other recent legislation, most specifically the chronic absenteeism bill, where we've been discussing a cycle of a 3-year review. Lastly, I will note in the membership section, in the first couple of lines, so this is section 1, items A through D. Suggestions had been made by our other organizations to adjust the language of these different membership sectors. We would not suggest any change from current language. Some of the adjusted language does make it even more restrictive and now requires specifically a principal, a superintendent, a school board member, and a teacher, rather than a representative or designee from the professional boards. This does present some challenges in capacity and staff time and being able to dedicate a person every single time. These positions are under extraordinary pressures. Their schedules are often unpredictable. And so we would like to remain in the existing language where we're allowing those professional organizations to choose a designee on their behalf. This is also consistent with the way that membership is described in the additional sections that have been proposed. So we see the need for consistency around how we are allowing our membership to provide designees at their behest. So in summary, still not recommending moving forward with any changes to this section of law. We did our best to reach consensus with these groups on a fairly complex topic over the last 24 hours or so. We were not able to reach full consensus, but it sounds like there's appetite to get there, and that we would suggest this alternative language that's been provided to you in written testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? Want to testify? Come on.
Or
Okay.
he goes off stage. If I can, just for clarification, I think you may have just summed it up, but just to make sure, you said that the network recommends no changes, but no changes to membership of the council, its council, but that you actually did have some recommendations on changes to the composition of the council. I'm not quite sure where you are in this balance of whether to move forward or just keep status quo.
Sure, and I'm happy to clarify. The Vermont network was not in agreement with the agency's recommendation to make no changes. They are moving forward with recommendations. So that is their testimony that they've continued to provide. We did reach some agreement on tweaks in the scope and duties section and moved towards consensus on using that term advisory rather than more directive language. Currently, the agency's recommendation is that no change should occur, much like the reasons that Emily stated around home study. There's a lot of complexity, and to make changes to the council while we are still kind of in the throes of other parts of this strategy are likely to be disruptive. If changes are needed, the agency is making this alternative recommendation that if we were to make the change, we would like to see it be intentional, and we would like to see it be representative of a wider inclusion of educator and practitioner voices. We actually, by coincidence, had an advisory council meeting Monday evening. During that session, our chair held a short survey of council members to understand what is missing in the current approach. And a majority of respondents did suggest that an educator focus is lacking and that they would like to see more educator input into the council. So the suggested membership additions by the Vermont Network are largely advocacy groups and human rights organizations that are not education focused. And so our suggestion would be to tweak that a bit. We would be agreeable to the inclusion of some additional membership from the Vermont Education or Equity and Education Collaborative, VEEC. We think that would be an excellent opportunity to help streamline some of those concerns and perspectives from our other human rights and advocacy groups. We would love to see expansion around special education needs. And again, thinking about who would be the appropriate body to support this council there, we would like to see special educators rather than a statewide group. And then we made a suggestion that in place of the social workers, National Association of Social Workers Vermont chapter, that we would include in that place a representative from the Vermont School Counselors Organization. So generally, our concern here is that the requested additions don't adequately represent the voices and needs of people who are practicing in these education spaces. And so we would like to try to meet that need with an alternative way.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay.
Hey there. I'm Charlie Glisserman. I'm the policy director at the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. I thought it might be helpful for the committee, if you all are interested, for me to just quickly share my screen and show the places where we agreed with AOE's suggested changes, if that would be helpful to quickly look through.
Sure.
Perfect. So I just joined the Zoom room. Perfect. And really appreciated the opportunity to connect with the agency and find agreement where we could. And I think some of their suggestions are really good ones that we are supportive of. As you'll see up here, I don't know if the best wording is designee or member to add to some of these groups, but that is something we're comfortable with. Senator Hinsdale, thank you so much for your suggestion about the Vermont Education and Equity Collective. I think that's a great suggestion. And we've also noted language around a social worker or school counselor appointed by the National Association of Social Workers. This is language that the lobbyists for both the social workers and school counselors felt was most appropriate to add here. And then here are all the changes to the duties that the agency recommended that we are comfortable with.
So the remaining differences are?
The remaining differences are, and I certainly don't want to speak for the agency, but these are the groups that they communicated not outright, that they felt that, in the interest of having practitioners that are represented on the council, they felt groups like the Coalition for Disability Rights, and the Commission on Women and the Office of Racial Equity would be better represented by other folks. My experience working with these groups is that these are the organizations that are supporting students who experience hazing, harassment, and bullying. These are folks who've been involved in policy and working groups around improving statutory responses to hazing, harassment, and bullying. They have participated very actively in those processes, and I would support them having a seat at the table. But of course, this is a policy decision for you all. I certainly don't want to speak for the agency. So if there's any further comments that they'd like to add, they're more than welcome.
Thank you, Charlie.
Yeah. Go ahead, Courtney. I was just going to call on you for a response. We can get a little dialogue going here.
Thank you. This is very helpful. Also, Charlie, great to see you. We've been emailing kind of third party, so great to make the virtual introduction. So yes, I would agree with what is being shared here. And I just want to clarify that the agencies our hesitancy in including these additional partners is not because they should not have a seat at the table. There are practical needs associated with this with this council. One of them being the ability to meet a quorum and run effective, meaningful meetings. And so the more that we grow this membership, the harder that quorum is to reach. And we would prefer to see that if the membership is going to grow, that these would be people who come to the table with the foundational knowledge around the education system and can really approach these problems in that kind of more comprehensive way. We would be happy to continue to talk through the membership. I don't know that this is not necessarily a sticking issue. I will say that in our conversations with our association partners, there was strong opposition to the way that the language has been changed around the major education organizations. The way that the language has now been adjusted from the existing language to what we see here, it creates specificity on a principal, a school board member, a superintendent, not a designee of the organization. And so that does create limitations in who can actually attend and act on behalf of those, act at the council on behalf of these boards. For example, a principal's associate, the way that this is being written, we would understand to mean that it's a principal or a designee of a principal, not necessarily a designee of the Vermont Principals Association, which may or may not be an active acting principal at the time of that designation, if that makes sense. So that distinction does feel important to us, that we would not want to exclude any members from those organizations.
Excuse me. Go ahead, Courtney.
Thank you. For clarity, all of these associations currently have a designee on the board, as is allowed under the current statute. And so our suggestion is not to make any changes in those sections A through E. And then, yes, we reached some consensus on the other areas where Charlie had pointed out.
So it sounds like you've reached agreement on I think the most important part was the fact that the council was actually doing a few functions that would normally be with the agency, and you resolve that, I think. And you've resolved whether it has to be a principal or whether it can be a representative from the association. And so we're down to just a couple of potential additions. And I have a sense there's no disagreement with the people that the agency wanted on. It's just a question of whether they would replace a couple of people you're interested in now, right? So we're really down to just a couple. It's a whole issue now, just great. Down to just a couple of.
That is absolutely right. And I know, especially at this late point in the session, I do not want to take up any more time than I need to. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I think that the composition as it was currently drafted in the miscellaneous judiciary, I'm working on that bill too. On the miscellaneous education bill, is good from our perspective with these two proposed additions and the designee language.
And we're talking about the language from the agency now that was submitted.
I am talking about a member appointed by the Vermont Education Equity Collective and a social worker or school counselor appointed by the National Association of Social Workers Vermont chapter.
So if we went with everything in the memo and added those two, everything in the agency memo, and added those two, the agency wouldn't love it, but you'd be good.
I have not seen the agency's memo.
Oh, okay. It cleared up a couple of those places where, well, it's posted, by the way.
Okay.
Today.
Perfect. I will bring it up right now.
Don't go away, anybody, we're getting close.
Can I just say something while we're shuffling? I understand just the number of people on any commission, etc. I tend to disagree, not that it wasn't well stated, Courtney, but I just tend to disagree that you need a much heavier focus on school officials and less on the people who support and experience those, or those who support and those who experience folks experiencing hazing, harassment, and bullying. I'd be happy to look toward the top for like, do all of those other organizations feel like they need somebody? But I would want to preference the people who've been added.
I think we're maybe looking, so I think we're down to like two people, right? Two positions. If we went with the agency and added the two you're talking about in particular, am I right about two?
So some of these, I submitted language to Beth and the chair that I feel comfortable with. For example, the suggestion is to remove the Commission on Women and the Office of Racial Equity because their interests, that the Education Equity Collective can represent equity concern and act as a conduit for those organizations. I think that it is most appropriate for those organizations to be on the council. I think it's a pretty high bar to represent the needs of students with disabilities and women and racial minorities, all with that one seat. But I certainly can't speak for these organizations, but that would be my preference.
So it's a little bigger than that. Okay. So big that. Okay.
I mean, I've been talking to Beak. I'm the one who suggested them. I don't know how closely the Agency of Education is working with them. I don't think they would say they are a conduit for the Commission on Women and the Office of Racial Equity.
And yet I am sympathetic to the position of the agency about, because this is about what happens in the school setting and how to do it. So I'm sort of sympathetic to them wanting to be mostly educators. And I'm also sympathetic to your argument that these are the people who deal with that. So is there any hope in you two working this evening?
I'm always happy to connect.
And come back to us tomorrow with hopefully something that we can all live with. Is that?
I'll just say maybe I personally agree with the replacing certain coalitions with ones that are specific to schools.
Like instead of social.
Especially honestly the social workers to school counselors. I think that would be acceptable to most. I do worry that like the Coalition for Disability Rights often has self-advocacy involved, and Vermont Special Education Administrators is different. We're really trying to fit the entire like student experience in one person.
One example of a member of the Coalition for Disability Rights is the Disability Rights Project at Legal Aid, which represents students who are involved in HHB
Exactly.
incidents. And
Yeah.
like, so those are the kinds of perspectives that you might get from a member.
And
like
that's
that.
kind of what I'm saying is like I think it's just too heavy on the side of these are people who are in schools. And it should be just co-equal to these are people who know what hazing, harassment, bullying look like for different groups and can make positive suggestions and changes.
Okay, well, we're running out. Go ahead. Courtney, I see your hand up, I think.
Apologies and thank you. I have to leave. I have to pick up my son. I'm so sorry. Emily Simmons will be on the call for a moment. I appreciate all of this conversation. Very happy to continue the conversation with Charlie and others over the next couple of hours, I guess, here. One thing,
That's
yeah, yeah. One thing I did want to note is I think our thoughts on this and you know, trying to answer the question around who is on the council. We really are at the point where we all collectively agree how important this work is and how important it is to include equity and inclusivity as the core of these conversations. What we are lacking is our ability to move forward with practical solutions. And so when we are leaning into the space of practitioners, not necessarily administrators or leaders, we're really trying to welcome in people who understand the nuances of our school systems so that we can deliver those practical solutions. Thank you all for your time. I will sign off, but Emily is still available.
Thanks. Okay, so we're running out of time. So if it can get worked out tonight and you bring it to us, that would be great.
Perfect. I will try my very best.
Okay.
And I appreciate your very thoughtful work and attention to this issue.
Thank you. We appreciate it. So I think with the miscellaneous bill, we were down to that single issue, resolving that.
Let me think for a second.
Right? That is that report from your notes.
Beth St. James Office,
We have one other, the one that John's gonna add. Yes.
Beth St. James Office of Legislative Counsel, I have added the performance contract language. I have a note that you were gonna have my colleague Sophie Zadatnian to talk about the last best offer concept.
Yep, that's still.
Okay.
Yep.
And then other than those two distinct pieces, I would say, yeah, my notes indicate that the hazing, harassment and bullying advisory council was the last outstanding.
So, yeah, okay.
So three
Yeah.
sections.
Yep. On right, absenteeism bill, we are down to the issue of study program and the action after enrollment issue, hearing after enrollment. How does the committee want to proceed? Thoughts on either one? So I think so on the miscellaneous bill, we have to sort out the best offer issue, and the raisement action. Hazing, harassment, and bullying issue in the council. And on chronic absenteeism, action after enrollment.
Which one are we, which question are
Make your
you?
pick.
Can you pick? Like what?
Action after enrollment. Or hearing after enrollment.
Sorry about section 7.
Yeah.
Home study.
Yeah.
We do have the home study representatives here.
Welcome to come up.
Greta Dunlap with Vermont Home Education Network. As I was listening, I was trying to think, okay, so maybe I can offer a solution. I don't know. The biggest problem is section 8. is that there is no input mentioned by homeschoolers whatsoever on whatever the department wants to come back with. I'll give you a little bit of a history. In 1985, 87, 86, the legislature was in an uproar for 2 or 3 years over home study, including 166B. The result of it was 166B. And finally, I believe Senator Lucy was on the Senate Ed Committee at the time. They said, the legislative committee, to the homeschoolers and to the agency, go back this summer, pick a couple of you, sit down, hammer this up, and come back with a solution in January that everyone's happy with. And that's how 166B came into view. And I would maybe suggest you do that now by removing section 7 and 8 and telling us to deal with it this summer and come back in January with something. Because section 8 is clearly leaving homeschoolers out of the conversation. And you get to Yoder but go back further to 1925 to Pierce v. Society, which is referenced in a lot of Supreme Court hearings, even to this day, that parents have a right, but a duty and a responsibility to direct the education upbringing of their children, and that you cannot mandate that. Because the case was about a Catholic school and a military school brought the case because the state of Oregon was saying you can only attend a public school. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't force someone to only go to a public institution. So here, I'm opting not to go to the public school. And what I'm afraid of, maybe this is not what the agency is saying, but I don't want to be in a position to advocate or have to fight with or push back on the agency of education becoming the supervisory union for homestead programs. They're not our superintendency. They're not a school. That's not their function. So is there some other solution? I'm willing to experience that. I've already got an appointment with the Secretary of Education and homestead consultant on the books to have this conversation, since that's what they want. So that would be a solution, and you guys could then get this bill out of here. Otherwise, I have to go home and tell homeschoolers that this is a possibility that we're going down the road of the agency once again, maybe becoming our school system, if you will.
Senator Sheen.
So I'm confused. I thought you were very eager to have
Oh,
section 7.
I was eager to have it replace section 8, but section 8 is still there.
Okay, so I'm just trying to understand. So are you saying get rid of section 7 and modify section 8,
I was saying,
where the AOE has to consult with you or your organization?
I was
Just
suggesting
read a
getting
report.
rid of both of them, and we'll work on it.
So, you had a question?
But it's very similar. I'm a little unclear why we can't modify section 8 to incorporate your subject matter experts to work with AOE, just modify the language and then. So
Well, it has-
Why do we need to put it in policy? Why don't we just say, work it out?
because there's an apparent appearance of an issue. And I'd like to see if there is an issue or not an issue, and then carry forward. And then, if we need to look at whatever was intended by section 7, we learn from the study on how we need to modify the program. Otherwise, we don't have an end product to react to do anything in January. That's
Okay, so. Yes, Senator Sheen, I want the hearings to be part of this, okay, because section 8 talks about oversight. What kind of oversight do we need? And it also talks about, we want to make sure they're complying with attendance. Those are the phrases that I'm concerned about. I don't, and because it would come back that they would have certain pieces of information they want us to submit. Okay, but if they don't like those pieces of information, and I mentioned this before, what do we do about it? And so I just don't like the terms oversight I don't like that, you need to know if we're attending. Like I said, the child wakes up in their school. They are attending, they are there. If you're actually talking about, are they getting an education? We have a bigger question that all the students in this state are facing. Are they getting an education? And why look so intently at homeschoolers? But,
So, I mean, the hearings are a form of oversight, but also, I mean, in this report, hypothetically, if we had more members, contribute to this report, it can come back with all sorts of things and we can do whatever we want with it, based on the testimony we got from AOE recently and the testimony we got 2 years ago. I have my doubts that they're going to want, stacks of paperwork that they're going to have to review on a regular basis. But even if that is something that they kind of in this hypothetical report, we don't have to make that into law. But I'm not sure what the issue is with us suggesting let's edit section 8 to include your organization to resolve
if you
this
could,
issue.
could you remove out the oversight?
I was just gonna suggest that we put improved continuities of the homeschool program to ensure homeschool practice.
So Emily, I'd like you in here in a second.
We can't say the two organizations go back and talk about these things.
I will say, in fairness to you, there is a little bit of outcome predetermined in the language, suggesting that there is a need. It might be better to say whether or not there is a need, and whether there is or is not an issue with attendance. Something. There's a little bit. It does suggest an outcome. So Emily.
I mean, I'm not opposed to action 7. I just want that.
What about we just say recommendations for updates to Vermont's home study program, and we just strike out the rest, and that gives them far more
Latitude.
latitude to come back with whatever recommendations they want.
So we'd have to put in there the collaborate, come back and report back.
Yeah.
To the committee.
You could put in that they collaborate with, but you can use Vermont Home Education Network if you need to.
Okay, now let's let Emily in for a second to react. Listen to this discussion. We have existing language. Comments?
Sure. So just to make it really clear, section 7, I reviewed it, and Beth is right there, is the House passed section 5. So just keeping track of the differences between the two bodies. I heard putting a period earlier in that sentence than it is. And when you're directing my client agency to do things, I love short sentences. So I'm for that. And then a really important point that I hope goes without saying, and hi, Retta, we know each other pretty well after all these years. We don't wait to be directed by the General Assembly to consult with the stakeholders who have an interest in the issues we're reporting on. So I was glad to hear, Retta, that you mentioned you're on the Secretary's book for a meeting that's coming up. Of course, you'll be among the stakeholders that we were planning to consult with anyway on this important report. I think I mentioned at the top of my testimony, we're also going to consult with folks like DCF and state's attorneys, even though they're not listed here either, right? So just the responsible way that we try to conduct our work and make sure that we're talking to everybody who needs to be heard and who has an interest before we're reporting back to the General Assembly. So I say let's end the sentence at home study program law, period.
Yeah, I think that was the, yeah.
Did someone read that to me?
Let me slowly do that. And on line 14, after the word with, and add the word any. With any recommendation. So it's not suggesting that there is an issue. Line 14. So let me just throw that
Where do you want to stop?
possibility. Same place that we talked about what Senator Sheem said. But I would suggest adding the wording. Senate Committee on Education with any recommendation for updates.
I don't know that it has an impact one way or the other, but I'm not opposed to it.
All right, so we're doing all on line 14. And then we end at law on 15 at the end.
Yeah.
So this August, that gets all excellent. So it ends there.
So I can sort of good with that. Emily, is that, I think you said it already, that's good for you, that's fine with you.
Are we taking out section 7 when we're doing that?
Are you good?
I'm good with that.
Yeah, I think we're there.
Because they don't have
Yeah.
the manpower.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I do understand the difficulty.
And you've heard the discussion going into the summer,
And
or you also said
Well,
you,
unless you all want to keep it.
I don't think I've ever been okay with taking a hearing process out.
it is out now.
I thought,
2 years.
It's not in the law.
well,
yet.
out of the language that we've been looking at this whole time, we haven't taken it.
So you would like to keep that.
I'll just say this, like, what I heard had nothing to do with concerns about people in Paul Junior Network who are passionately homeschooling their kids. I am concerned about educational neglect and kids that we don't know are not getting what they need. And if they exist, I don't know what we're doing about that in the next year.
Do we want to add the 60 grand for the position? Or for the funded?
I mean, I'm aware of consultants that AOE has hired for other things that they would like to do that I think they have money.
So
if you're saying that comes up. Because
Yeah.
they've had one is how long?
one-
Emily, how long has it been since there's been a
They
hearing?
don't have to extend contracts with APA Consulting. There's a lot of other stuff they can do.
We haven't had a hearing in more than 10 years, and to be clear, our testimony is that section 7 does represent an unfunded mandate on the agency.
So we'll have this report back in December.
I think it's a mandate. I think we are supposed to make sure these kids are okay and learning.
So-
May I jump in? I agree. I think there needs to be some kind of a hearing process. And I also understand that the hearing process that's written up is the old one. And there might be an easier way for the agency to do the same thing. What I'm after in a hearing process is, yes, the agency has something they can do about a program, but also a protection of the parents' due process if they're right to homeschool. So those are the two things that need to be in there. Does it need to be written the way section 7 is written? No. There might be other things. I mean, Emily, is there other ways to write it?
That's what we want to study with you, actually.
Yeah. And so,
What I heard from DCF is unless a mandatory reporter generally calls them with a complaint about a child who they're not as likely to lay eyes on because that child is not in a setting with other adults, that DCF is waiting for this oversight process to get referred by AOE, a child who's experiencing educational neglect.
And has there been many complaints of that? Do you know, Emily?
We get some complaints each school year about concern from a neighbor or a grandparent is typically what I see about a home study program. We follow up on those with the tools that we have. We use our DCF reporting tools appropriately with the information that we have. So we are fielding those complaints now, and we agree that there should be an agency role in the most serious cases, as I'm hearing Retta say, some type of due process hearing. We want to identify the correct process.
So that's, you're telling us now, that's going to be part of the report.
Yes.
I just don't think we can have no process in the meantime.
But we've had no process.
may I ask, what happens if you leave it in and it's probably not going to be used, but is an unfunded mandate, can that be in statute? Yes, it can.
That's what we specialize in.
But I think that the agency's position is that they would have to hire somebody on routine or if this goes into law.
I would never come to you and ask you to pass a law that I had no ability to follow. Right, that would make me highly uncomfortable to have that law on the books with everything that's on the record about the real lack of capacity that we're facing.
Okay. Let's just figure, what are we doing? We're agreed on section 8, I think. As written.
Yes, as rewritten.
As rewritten. We have one vote for keeping 7 in, section 7 in.
I mean, if they're gonna come back in December with the report on what to do, then fine, we take it out.
Let's strike it. All right, so
I am also going to be waiting for this.
I hear what you're saying.
Okay.
Robert, I will put that on.
So,
I do think there's some kind of. Yes.
Emily, thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for putting up with.
No, thank you. That was a
Good Vermont voice.
You've got your president.
Good
Okay,
evening, everybody. Thank you.
okay.
thank you.
So we're almost, we're getting closer on those two. And we just say that I want to do whatever we have to do to get, we gotta get 955 out of here. So depending on discussion tomorrow, possibly we'll go Monday. Depending on where we are. We have, we're going to launch testimony for tomorrow. The agency, got the campaign for Vermont for a few minutes. We have Los Coast Community Alliance can't come in with people for Tuesday. So who else do we want to hear from? This short run about one. You want to get some testimony, get a block of testimony in. Yeah, there tomorrow.
So is it okay if I zoom in next week? Or is it?
Yes,
Your surgery on Monday, I got another follow-up on Tuesday. Hopefully I'll be able to be here, I'll be.
Like you told me, and of course you can zoom in. Yes, that'll be good. In fact, if we can. Yeah. Yeah.
VASPO. They just sent us a letter.
When did we get that?
I don't know.
So a few hours ago.
Okay. Does that have it?
Yes.
I forwarded it.
Okay,
Okay. And so we can have them in to contact there.
Yep.
If it's, we have any time tomorrow after, especially I have
Might be a little tight on time.
Tuesday.
sorry, are we talking about meeting on Monday? Cause I need to rearrange things now.
I'm on a commission judiciary thing, the Supreme Court. We have a meeting that day. Yeah, so I think it starts at 10:30.
How long ago?
Probably an hour and a half.
Do you do that here?
No.
So I could do like 8 to 10 a.m. That's my only available window.
Let's see where we are tomorrow
Okay,
and make a decision. And
so VASPO on the major reform question, I think we need to better understand the school construction piece unless you want Senator Harrison or somebody else to do that. But I sent a suggested change that returns to some more specific language from the House on what kinds of projects would be prioritized for school construction dollars. I
don't know, did that come over in 955?
No, they must have taken it out at some point.
which leads me to the other question about moving things out a year and that no longer necessarily being as aligned with the conversations about consolidation or facilities or resource sharing. I think maybe we could hear from somebody from the House who's passionate about the school construction section.
You know, suggestion, let me know, and we can, and we can look at timelines, so what we can do.
Could Daphne, so I don't lose this thread, could Daphne email like Peter Conlon and say, who is your school construction passion or something? Or I know that institutions on that side didn't look at it. I do think it would be good if institutions on our side looked at it. I do think these are building and facilities and grounds questions more than education or finance questions.
Let's get them in and, yeah, I'm fine with that, by the way.
Okay.
Can we ask GovOps to comment on the language which is in the current draft in regards to governance, school board?
Those.
There's the only thing about boards here is the makeup of the seasons.
I thought there was all kinds of votes they have to take and then they have to,
Yeah,
those votes usually you could GovOps.
oh, that language, by the way, that we went through yesterday, I added.
Right.
I added it as a mechanism for making it possible for boundary changes to happen.
Did we get that? So it would be nice to have some other fingerprints on.
Oh, I don't.
And I would like, remember, ask for the CTEs to either just be included or to comment on being included from the get-go in all of these
Who
conversations.
would you like to have in?
We could have Eric Remerson, who's the CTE FactEd, the director of the directors.
Pick one.
Yep. And I was hoping somebody was producing a map that overlaid the CTE districts
Yeah, on to
with some other map.
Yeah.
When that whole appropriate, I don't know if that's that. On the question of tuition and fees above the foundation formula. I think there are probably a number of superintendents who could comment on that. I mean, like, I don't want to just lean on who I know, but I'd invite in our superintendent because I've had this conversation with him a lot about school trips and making sure everyone gets to participate and nobody feels like they're either required to pay or they can't go if they can't pay. So that was the school trip piece. I think the whole question of can a school charge tuition on top of what they receive in the foundation formula? I think there are probably both public and independent high schools that have an interest in making sure that's equitable, right? Because there are high schools that receive tuition dollars that are public.
Half the tuition kids want to go to public schools.
Right. So at least one of each of those, like one public superintendent, one private headmaster, or whoever.
Are you talking about kids going on a trip to France or train or going to school thing? I thought Act 73 prepared.
It involves both. There's fees question and the tuition question. Fees, are you gonna charge somebody to go on a field trip?
Oh,
But also it could be, are you gonna charge an additional $1,000 fee to apply to go to a school? And then the tuition question is its own separate bucket of you're getting the foundation formula, but can you then also charge on top of that to get more money? Instead of the foundation formula plus.
So that's for independent schools?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
All schools actually.
it's the whole school, so that's what I'm saying, like, we're
Then
gonna
why
have.
did the foundation? That-
Like, you could make a case that we wait and find out what the weights are and then have this discussion.
Well, but I mean, like, whatever the weights are, everybody's gonna have to live with that.
I agree.
So
Yeah.
everyone's gonna have to live.
Everybody's on that page.
Yeah.
So,
That's
Curious.
why.
Yeah.
Who's looking at weights?
there's a study coming to us in December done by JFO.
Should we check in
Why
with them
is-
before we leave about that study?
Well, we know it's December.
Do the money committees agree? that approach on that part down the road that they agree that that's the right approach? What is foundation on that? What is? Any money, the money committee seems to control about 60% of this building. They agree with that approach of studying weights, coming up with a, I just don't know what the heck is going on.
Yes,
That's all current law. So
they feel pretty strongly, I think many people feel strongly that we wait until that study, so.
Good. I don't know what they're thinking and, they're, we'll see, lots of surprises.
Okay.
So it sounds like Daphne got all my people, do you need anything?
She's on.
Check that we have time.
All right, we're adjourned.